Okay, welcome to our Healixia session live from the Anticancer Fund. First of all, we'd like, of course, to thank our sponsors. Then it is my pleasure to announce the two speakers of today. First of all, we have Dr. Gabry Buyens, physician of education, and he has a wealth of experience in senior roles in pharmaceutical industry, in biotechnology, and as a CEO of General Hospital. Since 2 years, he is medical director of the Anticancer Fund. And after him, we will hear Dr. Gabry Kuijten, also physician by education. She has an experience in general medical practice and also in the pharmaceutical industry, both in medical affairs and clinical operations. Gabry is passionate about informing patients with clear and accurate information about their disease and treatment options. And in pursuit of that passion, she is co-founder of the My Cancer Navigator, for which she is now also coordinating physician. So with this, I would like to hand over the word to Dr. Gabry Buyens.
It's my pleasure to introduce the Anticancer Fund. The main focus of today is what we do on patient information, and Gabry will talk about that, but I will guide you through the other things we are doing at the Anticancer Fund. First, a little bit of history. The Anticancer Fund originally was called Reliable Cancer Therapy, and it was a fund that was founded by Luc Verhelst. And Luc Verhelst was confronted with cancer through his sister who got cancer. And Luc really got frustrated with the difficulties to get the information about cancer, about the treatment options for his sister. And he decided to put some of his money in a fund, and he hired Lydie Meheus to set up a small group and to create reliable cancer therapies. In the beginning, it was trying to find our way, our mission, and what we stand for. And we were also confronted with a number of commercial opportunities that could be taken up, that need investments. But the non-profit part and the commercial part, they don't go together into one organization. So therefore, Droya was created and spinned out of the Reliable Cancer Therapy. And then the Anti-Cancer Fund became really the Anti-Cancer Fund as the research foundation, the non-profit foundation as we know it today. And in 2018, we became a Belgian foundation of public utility. Now, we are a relatively small fund. We have about 2 million euro to spend. Most of it goes to research. What is important is that all the overhead costs of our organization are covered by the founder, and he is putting this in the foundation. And therefore, all the other investors and the other sponsors or people who give us money, they are reassured that their money really goes to the project that they fund, and they don't have to carry the overhead costs. We have actually 3 pillars that we work on. The first pillar is the information for patients. The second one is the involvement in clinical trials. And the third one is the policy work that we do. Clinical trials, that's the core of our activities. We are an independent non-profit organization that works with universities, with academics, and our major stakeholders for these clinical trials are the investigators that want to set up investigators-driven clinical trials. We focus on the trials that have limited commercial value for the pharma industry, but we want a potential social value and generate social value. We focus to those treatments that eventually can be brought to the patients as quickly as possible. So we are patient-centered in our approach. Now, the way we offer our service is not only financial support, we also try to work with the academics on the scientific. We have a scientific team of about 12 people, a number of PhDs, oncologists, medical degrees in our group. We also do on consortium building, and that's how, with a relatively small fund, we can be involved in quite a lot of studies. So sometimes initially we start to fund the academics and then try to find other sponsors to join us, and then we get our money back, and then we can invest it in new studies. So the networking and the consortium building is part of what we are doing. But we also work on protocol development and documentation. So it's a vast area of activities that we are involved in the clinical trials. Now, what are our criteria? They have to, projects have to be patient-centered, industry not interested, obviously. We want to improve survival of cure, or improve the cure rate. And we go for a limited risk of trial execution failure. So we want to work with a setting that is capable of doing the clinical studies. And we go for a low competition because in the past, we have seen that some of our studies didn't recruit well, not because of the scientific value, but because there was just too many studies in a given indication. Now, we have an evaluation process, but basically we have two paths that we use to attract projects. One are the spontaneous applications, but that includes some scouting from our side, so where we go and discuss with investigators and try to find new ideas and set up clinical trials. And the other is the classical call for projects, like many organizations organize. We had 11 trials that have been completed, 10 trials ongoing, and 4 trials in preparation, and we hope to do many more of them. Unfortunately, there have been a few delays, well, not thanks to, but due to the COVID situation, as you probably all know, that had an impact on the setup and of clinical trials. Here are the trials that we currently are running or recruiting, and we have a number of focus areas. Drug repurposing has been one of our focus area, but also less common and rare cancer. We have a few clinical trials in pediatric oncology. And by the way, we just wrote a blog on pediatric cancer since September is the month of pediatric cancer. So I invite you to read our blog on our website. Also combination trials, and then the prevention of tumor recurrence is one of our interest topics. Just to come back a little bit on the applications, in 2009 we had a request for application, and we are very, very proud and pleased that the ERTC chose the Anticancer Fund to fund the STRESS-2 trial, which is a big trial, and the original STRESS study has just been published in the Lancet Oncology, and now there's a follow-up of that study. You can find the details on the slide. In 2020, we one of the things that differ us from other organizations in Belgium is that we focus on international collaborations. We do clinical trials in Europe, not in Belgium. Some of them, of course, in Belgium. We try always to include Belgian centers, but our focus is international, maybe mostly in Europe, but also sometimes in the US and even in Australia. In 2020, we were able to set up a call for research proposals together with the Rising Tide Foundation, and that gave us access to much more money. And then we have 2 projects now selected. I cannot disclose them because we are now in the contract negotiation and in the confidential period of the project, but very soon they will be announced. Just to give a little bit an example, because we have done a lot on repurposing. Well, repurposing, drug repurposing is known to all of you, and now it's a lot have been said about drug repurposing during the COVID pandemic, and we think it's a cost-efficient way to increase cancer patients' options, maybe not as standalone therapy, sometimes in combination to improve current therapies. And we are investing by promoting and trying to set up a number of these repurposing drug trials. Now, drug repurposing is still facing important scientific, financial, and regulatory hurdles. And so we are involved in a number of things. We invest in clinical trials, but we also made the REDO database, which is a rather big. It says 268, but that's an old poster that I just put as an illustration. We exceeded the 300 drugs for which we identified potential value in oncology, and it's a useful database that investigators can use, and where they can find information to set up clinical trials. We don't go and promote repurposed drugs to patients unless there is clear-cut evidence, and for, as you know, most of these drugs, this evidence is not yet there. So therefore, we really want to do the good clinical trials to see if the preclinical benefit or the early clinical trial benefit that has been demonstrated can be proven through these trials. Our third pillar, and because we will come up to the patient information, but we call it our third pillar, is policy change, because it's relatively new. And why are we now in policy? Well, we saw that we were involved in a number of clinical trials, but it was not the path to get these treatments, even if you show some benefit, and to get them to the patient, that path is not really easy. And there are hurdles, in legislation, there are hurdles in regulatory affairs. So therefore, we decide to interact on a European level, so that the trials that we do can eventually lead to treatments that can be available for patients. And I will just give an example of the policy work, but we are involved in many, and we work with the European Cancer Organization on many of these issues together. And one is the example is bringing off-label indications on label. As if we can show that a repurposed drug has effect in oncology, then it's not very easy if you are not the license holder to get it on the label. So there's now some discussions, and with the STAMP group of the European Commission, and FBI is involved in that discussion as well. But the Anticancer Fund plays an important role in that discussion. Connecting stakeholders. We are a small fund, but we try to connect everyone so that we have a larger platform to do what we want to do. A few examples. One is the pediatric platform, and this is also because in 2018 there was a lot of media attention regarding deep G treatments with a center in Mexico that asked huge prices without any scientific proven therapies, and not willing to share. And we were confronted by this, and we had some interactions on national television, and then we were called by INAMI, and with other organizations like Kom op tegen kanker, Kick Cancer, and the BSPHO, which is the pediatric hematological organization in Belgium. We decided to set up a platform for better information, and this will lead to a website. We are now in discussion with the DSPHO, but you will hear from that pretty soon because it's in the final stage. We also are involved in a roundtable on cell therapy. This is a joint exercise between the Anticancer Fund, Kom op tegen kanker, and the Stichting, and we often get to the question, yes, tree organization, why tree organization? Are you doing all the same? Well, we are doing things a little bit differently, and now we see that if we have common ground, it's better to put our resources together and really to have a common front and divide our competences, which are different in the tree organization. So we are now doing a round table to see if academic projects in oncology with cell therapy can lead to effective treatments that could be brought to patients in time, in a safe but also affordable way. Now, these round tables, we had the first with representative of all the Belgian academic centers involved in cell therapy. It was all the universities were there, and in October 2020 we have all the CEOs of the university hospital and track transfer to see how they view the future of cell therapy, academic cell therapy in Belgium. And again, we are doing the networking, bringing the people together, and we are as such a facilitator for these events. And then the last pillar, informing patients. In the past, we did a lot on informing patients. We wrote the ESMO guidelines for patients for all the cancers, and you can still find them on the ESMO website. If the guidelines are in green, that's the Anticancer Fund that made them. And now ESMO has been taking up and renewing, and then the guidelines are published in blue. So you can see that more and more of the guidelines are now written and done by ESMO itself. But in the beginning, the Anticancer Fund was making all these guidelines for patients, together, of course, with oncologists and patient organizations and ESMO. Huge exercise. The REDO database is also available for patients and for investigators. We collaborated on a book, the 100 Vragen over Kanker, that Johan Swinne has been writing with Kom op tegen kanker and us, and that will be on the shelf in October. So they are printing it as we speak. The Pedic platform, I already told you about that. And then last but not least, My Cancer Navigator. And it's my pleasure now to hand over to Gabry, who is the coordinating physician of My Cancer Navigator.
So why do we do this? Why do we offer this? Well, as you all work in the medical field, you probably know from your own either professional or personal experience that people sometimes have difficulty communicating with their doctors, or doctors with their patients. Sometimes they're afraid to ask the questions that they want to know. Sometimes they don't understand all the information that's being presented to them. There's often not enough time, and people may be afraid to impose on the doctor or to question what the doctor is saying. Sometimes people are overwhelmed by emotions, and the information just doesn't get absorbed at the time that it's presented to them. And then outside of the doctor's office and the consultation, there's also a lot of information and disinformation out there online. The neighbor has something to say, the great aunt has something to say, and in the end, people don't know, what's true and what's right anymore. So the goal of the Anti-Cancer Fund in providing this service to patients is that people can make well-informed decisions and engage in shared decision-making based on accurate and relevant information. I do want to mention here, we're going to be talking a lot about patients, but the service is actually also available to physicians. So if there is a general practitioner who gets questions from a patient and is wondering about, additional options or alternative treatments or what have you, they can also rely upon us to provide them with the right information that they can then share with their patients. So what exactly do we do? We make it a big thing to provide non-judgmental and evidence-based information. Non-judgmental meaning if people ask us about the latest immunotherapy or about green tea, we're going to approach it in the exact same way. Namely, we're going to look and see what information is out there, what clinical studies have shown, or preclinical studies, if that's all there is, and we're going to provide that feedback in a understandable way to patients. So this can be about cancer and more in-depth information on what the cancer entails. It could be information on guidelines and standard of care for a specific kind of cancer. It could be questions about clinical trials or experimental treatments. Sometimes people ask us, are there any specific centers with expertise, or I'm considering a second opinion, who would you recommend, etc. Sometimes there's questions on drug interactions, and like I mentioned, also on alternative or complementary treatments. Now, what's important is we will only provide information based on the questions that a patient is asking. So we're not going to spontaneously mention all the different possibilities or all the clinical trials from China to the US that are available. We start from the need that's there with the patient, and that's what we're going to be looking for. So we have a team that we work with. He already touched upon it. We have a group of scientists and doctors working together at the Anticancer Fund. And we have a couple of consulting oncologists who also provide inputs into the information that we find for specific cases from their clinical experience. So the way it works is the patient will contact the Anticancer Fund through some route, and we'll get to that in a little bit. And then the first contact, the next contact is with myself or my colleague physician to call the patient, and we'll ask what exactly is going on, what treatment have you already had, or what diagnosis have you been told you have, and what are your concerns, what are your questions. And again, it could be a whole range of things, but we always try to dig a little deeper. If people say, I want to know what else is possible for my illness, they usually already have something in mind. So we ask, okay, what are you thinking about? And then, it may be an experimental treatment they heard about. They may be afraid of taking chemo. They may be afraid of undergoing surgery. So we try to dig a little deeper so we can really answer their questions in a way that's relevant to them. We also ask that they send their medical records. Of course, we have a privacy and liability policy that we ask them to consent with. And the reason we really want to look at their medical records is to ensure that the information that we look for and provide to them is relevant to their situation. So sometimes they need some support also to get those medical records, but we ask them to do that. We don't do it for them. Then the research managers will do the literature search as appropriate for the question. We'll discuss it in our patient information team, the whole group that I just mentioned. And then myself or my colleague will contact the patient again. Initially, I would often go to people's homes and spend an hour or two there going over all the information with them. Currently, obviously, it's done by video call or sometimes phone call. We also provide them with a written feedback summary so that they can review the information later on. If all the questions are answered, that's where it ends. We also are very clear about that with the patients. We do not do an active follow-up, but they can always come back to us with additional questions if that were to become relevant over time. If there's already additional questions, we restart the cycle, but then communication will usually be by mail or by phone. So a little bit more detail, you don't really need to know all the exact steps, but I think it's important to know that our research managers have each develop their own specialties. So they will usually focus on the same types of cancer. So they really know, all the latest developments and publications, etc. We answer very quickly. Usually if a patient contacts us, they will have either an email or a phone call within 24 hours. And our literature search is done in a very structured and systematic way. So here you see some of the sources listed, but I want to show you the document that we use for that. I think there's some medical affairs professionals in the room or in the virtual room, and I'm sure some of you have experience with medical information as well, so you know how important it is to approach that in a correct and an accurate way. So can we show the first PDF? So yeah, I can start talking about it while we're getting it on the screen. So the work document is an internal document that we use for ourselves to summarize the searches and all the information and to discuss it within our team. So it starts out with a summary of the patient information and their medical history and their questions. Yes. If you can just slowly scroll through it. So we, like I said, we summarize their history, we summarize the questions that they have asked, and then if you can continue scrolling, we will summarize the guidelines that are relevant to their specific situation, and also we note exactly which guidelines we consulted and on what date. Next. Then we'll do a literature search that is specific to whatever question they asked. Again, noting what search terms were used, how many hits there were, how many relevant hits, etc. The clinical trials searches, we look at, of course, clinicaltrials.gov, but also the WHO and European database. And then there may be some additional question-specific search that we will also document properly. You can scroll a little further. In the of course, we'll then, after we have the meeting with everybody, we'll write our conclusion, and we have this whole list in the appendix of reliable sources and important sources that we use. So this is a document, this is the basis of all the information we provide to the patient, and also if there's new questions that come up, it will be amended and added on to. Now, if you can go to document number 2, there you will see an actual work document that's been filled out for a patient. So here's the summary of her medical history. If you can go down, this is all the things that were proposed by her doctors. It was quite a complex situation, a whole list of questions she had for us regarding her treatment. And then here you see the summary of, in this case, the NCCN guidelines with some specific comments. Okay, this is applicable to this patient, so we have to go this, path in the algorithm to decide on which would be appropriate treatment in her case. Yeah, you can leave it at this and go back to the slides. So after we have then our meeting with the patient information team, where we discuss the case, so the clinicians will then give their input in the situation. For instance, if we find some trials that we think are relevant for the patient, they may have experience with, some of these experimental drugs and say, it could be an option, but it's quite toxic. Maybe for this patient, it's not so attractive to use this, or they may be aware of recent data that gives more background information that's useful for the patient. So then, like I said, there will be a patient summary that myself or my colleague will go over with the patient, in basically a timeless consultation. It's not a real consultation, but we have a lot of time to really go into the details and ask questions, answer questions along the way. So now we go to the next PDF, number 3. And there as well, we have a template for the summary to the patient that we use for everyone in the same way, where we first, again, write the summary of the patient's history, and then write each question and the information we found that's relevant to that question. And we also provide references. The references are sometimes useful for the patient, but it's also meant to be used by the physician if the patient wants to share their information with the clinician, or it's the clinician who asks for the information. They can look up things as needed. So just to give you a little bit of an idea who contact us to request information. We had almost 300 patients that we supported in 2019. And I think this year the number will be even higher. And as you can see, the cancers that we receive questions about are not really representative of what we find in epidemiological studies. And notably, brain cancer is strongly represented. And of course, that's partly because the prognosis is so poor that people really tend to be looking for solutions and options. And of course, it's often about young people also. In this slide, you can see that we receive questions from people all over the world. There's still a majority coming from Belgium, about 42%, but like he also mentioned earlier, we truly are an international organization, and people can contact us from all over the world and approach us with questions from Australia to Canada and South America, India, and we always try to, do what we can to also figure out the local system. Recently there was a patient from India who had a cancer. It was the son who contacted us, and he didn't know where to go, and we were able to get him in contact with a clinician there to be able to get an appointment and get treatment. So here you can see who is the contact person that we're usually connecting with. In the majority of cases, it's the patient themselves contacting us, but also, of course, it's not always doable for a person, or they're not always in a state of mind to be doing this research and information seeking. So often it's a partner, a son or daughter, or a parent contacting us for the patient. Of course, we always ask consent from the patient. We're not going to discuss medical records with someone else without their permission, but we're happy to support if it is someone else just as much as when it's the patient. Now, the questions that we receive are usually geared towards treatment. Obviously, sometimes it's very general. What are my options? Sometimes it's very specific. I heard that this person had immunotherapy for their cancer, and why can't I get that? Or I heard about this clinical trial, or I've been proposed to participate in a clinical trial and I don't really understand what I'm reading here. Can you give me an idea what that would mean for me, etc. Then how do people get to us? Now, to be fair, this is something we've only recently started systematically asking of patients. It didn't used to happen that way. So there's about 40% where we don't know how they reached us. But then you can see there's a lot of word of mouth referrals, if you will. So it could be people who are somehow connected with the Anticancer Fund through partner organizations, through donors, through colleagues who have friends and family and know people who get confronted with cancer. But there's also patients who refer other patients, for instance. And of course, people also find us online. So Where are we headed next? We've been working in this way now for about 2 years. Before that, already the Anticancer Fund spent a lot of time and effort into supporting patients with information, but only through email mainly. So this format for My Cancer Navigator has been around now for 2 years. It's free for patients, and we are entirely supported by philanthropy and donations. And we would like to expand. We'd like to be able to reach more patients. I haven't shown the slides from a survey that we did in the pilot phase, but it's very clear that people really feel empowered to to take charge and to participate in their cancer trajectory and the decisions that need to be made. And there's clearly a need, unfortunately, to provide this support for at least some of the patients. So we'd like to expand. We also like to reach more physicians. Every now and then we get referrals from physicians or from onco nurses, for instance. And although when we first discuss the service we provide, sometimes there's a little bit of suspicion or a little bit of doubt on the part of healthcare professionals, but usually once they see what we do and the information we provide, they're actually quite appreciative. They feel that in a way we make their lives also a little bit easier. Of course, for this, we'd like to, secure funding and collaborations to achieve a more sustainable model. We've already, of course, connected with all the other organizations that he had also mentioned in his talk to at least let them know that this is what we're doing. We also get some referrals from them. But we can definitely still reach more patients. And, if there's organizations that we could collaborate with, that would build a broader base to support the service, of course. And then from a more internal perspective, we are currently working on finding or building a CRM type platform so that we can work more efficiently internally and share amongst our team more easily what we're doing. So I want to just touch upon what maybe the crossroads can be between pharma companies and the Anti-Cancer Fund. There's a few areas where I think our work intersects. That's first on the side of clinical development and clinical trials. There are, like he had also mentioned, there are some trials that we support or that we get requests for that may involve, for instance, a repurposed drug, but also a more recent drug that's, one of your companies may be bringing to market. And in those situations, we might reach out and ask, is this something that you can make available for this trial? Another way that, of course, clinical trials are important is when we think a patient might be eligible for a clinical trial. And we also, in those situations, we make the effort to reach out to either the PI for the trial or the responsible sponsor to see, is the study still open? Would this patient qualify? Or when is the study going to open? Or are there centers in this or that country, so that, we can already provide the patient with that information and they're already one step ahead, or the physician, the treating physician's already one step ahead if he or she wants to consider that for the patient. On the medical information side of things, we, potentially if you get questions from physicians or patients for your medical information service, there may be situations where you might feel it's appropriate to refer them to us. if it's a situation where they're looking at many different treatment options, if there's a request for samples or compassionate use that maybe you cannot honor for whatever reason, you can always send those people to us and we can see what additional information we might be able to find. On the other hand, we might also contact you sometimes. It happens that a treating physician wants to prescribe a drug off-label for a patient, or there are clinical data that indicate that something might be useful, but it's, there's no registration or there's no reimbursement, or you can think of any kind of situation like that. And then we're going to be calling you and ask, hey, do you have any means to make this drug available for this patient? Of course, we know in Belgium and also in many other countries, there are early access program, medical need program, compassionate use, etc. And if there are formal programs, we usually know to find them. But there's also situations where even if there's not a formal program, something might be possible. And so we might be calling you or your colleagues to inquire about that. And there too, it makes things easier for the treating physician if they have that information on hand. They have a name and a phone number and conditions to be able to make that request. So that is what I wanted to present today. I don't know if there are questions for Guy or myself.
Yeah, we had one question coming in during the session. So how do you address patients that have difficulties in understanding the complex science behind some of the clinical data?
Actually, that's, I guess, the core of what we're doing is to translate clinical data and science to the person who needs to know it. And that's also why I always try to get to know the people a little bit. It's very important to know, are they, an engineer or a nurse, or are they, a truck driver, or, somebody with no medical background or very little education, etc. So it depends a lot on the situation and on the person, but we find a way to, make the numbers be more relevant. And for instance, one thing that I think you all know about, and it's always a discussion also when we, for instance, develop marketing materials in pharma companies, right? The relative and absolute gain in response, for instance. You could say, oh, with this treatment, you have or survival, you have a 50% less chance of dying, but that 50% may, mean that instead of 2 out of 100 people dying, it's now 1 out of 100 people dying. And so those are things that, can be confusing for people, and it's very important to explain what that means. In this case, what absolute gains are versus relative gains.
Actually, it's a very important question, and this is also the reason why we at the Anticancer Fund decided to set up this service, My Cancer Navigator. A navigator is someone who guides you through the information, and that's the reason why we went from the electronic generated information by the scientists that we tried to provide in a language that is understandable for the patient, and now we go with interaction with a physician, and the physician contacts the patients, try to understand better the questions of the patients, and also try to give the information. And in that discussion, the physician will feel and can get the feedback, and will feel if the patient understands this information. It's a very costly setup. I mean, it's a lot of people involved, a lot of effort for one patient, but it really makes a difference in trying to get this very dry information that we generate from the literature to something that is relevant for the patient. And in these discussions, and I follow the discussions and I hear it from Gabry and Marielle and the other people, sometimes it starts with a question, but it goes further as long as we go, because the patient needs more explanations. And that's why we went this route. And it's because what you now asked as a question, that's really that made us go into that direction.
Do you have plans to start collecting real-world data or collaborate on disease registries?
The short answer is no, not currently. We don't have plans to collect data. There's several reasons for that. I think the most obvious one is lack of time and resources, but also we really want to make the patient feel comfortable to contact us and to share their information. And we feel it would increase, it would raise a hurdle or a barrier if we, start asking informed consent to collect data and chase things down. Although, we talk about it sometimes because we would also really like to show the outcome of what we do. I think there's many times that we keep people from seeking a second opinion if they get a confirmation that, they're treated perfectly according to guidelines. I think sometimes we contribute to patient being more compliant with their treatment because they understand it better. But for now it's not.
Of course, it's not on the table, as Gabry said, in the patient information section of the Anticancer Fund. It is on the table when we speak about the clinical trials. And in the clinical trials, we are now confronted with applications for trials where there are not a lot of patients, where there's rare cancers, where it's very difficult to set up the clinical trials. We are very much in favor in new trial designs, platform trials where we can put some arms that we find interested in, like the Stampede and these kind of trials are really things that we think, but also trying to get real data to support efficacy in some instances. And we are now, as I mentioned, in this huge discussion on cell therapy. And if you have a few patients with a non-ATMP product in a local center, how can you show efficacy? And how can you show the safety? So these are things that we are concerning. So we are really in a debate. We are really into these discussions with the Anticancer Funds, and these discussions are really important.
Flyers or other means of informing patients when they visit oncology centers in Belgium?
Actually, flyers are on our to-do list, so we will have some in the next few months. However, getting them to the patients, I'm not sure currently if we can just put them out in hospitals, but we have actually already spoken with quite a few oncologists and the oncology departments in hospitals, and we want to do more of that. And it may be more often through the GPs actually that patients might come to us because sometimes it's there where they come up with a lot of questions. So currently, people can be referred to the websites, but we don't have them yet.
Okay, so it's put a little bit, and yes, we were planning to do it, but it's a little bit on hold due to COVID. I mean, there's not a lot of hospitals just said us that for the time being, flyers and things like that is not really relevant. I think now it's changing again, and so we will see. If it's relevant to start, but the project, and Gabry has been writing a lot of stuff for the flyer, so we have a lot of material.
Okay, maybe a final question. So the name now is clear with Anticancer Fund and My Cancer Navigator. Do you have any ambition to go beyond cancer and to also put up the same services for other indications?
Well, I can speak from a personal point of view. I would personally like to do that, but I do know that the setup that we have here with the Anti-Cancer Fund, with all the knowledge and experience that people have here and the willingness to work on this project is not easy to find elsewhere. And the Anti-Cancer Fund will continue to work on cancer only. But if you have any suggestions for other organizations who might be interested in supporting such a service for other illnesses, I'd be happy to talk with them.
Yeah, I can concur. I mean, the Anti-Cancer Fund, we have a mission and we have to stick to our mission, and our mission is in oncology. So the Anti-Cancer Fund will not go beyond cancer. We've made a small exception that we have dedicated some work on COVID, also some voluntary work. People like myself, we went in testing in some Woonzorgcentra and things like that on a voluntary basis. Gabry did work on a voluntary basis. And that was an exception, but otherwise we are stick to cancer. Nevertheless, I think it's really relevant, this kind of service for other indications. And we will, of course, support Gabry and facilitate if she would find other organizations, and we were willing to share our expertise, and we are willing to help to set it up in other indications. That's for sure. But within the Anti-Cancer Fund, it's not within our mission.
I see we have no further questions, so then I would like to thank Guy and Gabry for their clear explanations on the Anticancer Fund and My Cancer Navigator. Thank you all for joining the session, and we hope to see you on one of our upcoming sessions for Healixia. Thank you very much. Bye.